Great peace, great peace, great peace. I had to redo this video because I'm on a MacBook and it didn't pick up the video, and the video was like 18 minutes long. So let me redo this. Um, I want to say this about adult accountability, um, and I want to give instances of adult accountability that kind of soured my experience and my maturation in growing into an adult and actually experiencing life as a um, full on um, adult, and being married and having children, right? When I was a young kid, I noticed that the way that the community handled internal conflict, and living in Chicago. And right before I even say this, right, I don't want to, make it seem like Chicago is a bad place completely, because there is good spots in being from Chicago and living there, right? Take your kids to Bud Billington Parade weekend, and also week. During the time that school is starting back up. I think it occurs in like late August or September. Take your kids there to have that experience. There's going to be floats going by. There's going to be uh, concession stands everywhere. There's going to be events everywhere. Take your kids to experience that and being around other people who look like them. This is an experience that I've had since the 90s and going, and I've never had an experience like this outside of being in this particular place during this particular time and meeting the people that I've gotten to meet since then. Um, I've been to almost, Columbus, Indiana. I've been, Ohio and everywhere, right? I've never experienced black unity in that fashion and being there during that moment at the Bud Billiken parade. You're not going to get an experience like that in America, you know, if you haven't been, right? So let me just say this, right? Let me get into the conversation. I don't want to be long. Um, when I was growing up, I noticed that the men, when we were living in the projects, the way that they handled, internal conflict, and dealing with arguing with other men, and it sometimes didn't even get to that point. They waited to get you. They weren't knuckling up, they waited to get you. And the police came after, and that was that. You didn't hear anything. The community didn't hear anything about something, being prevented, or something, as far as the crime being prevented, or, you know, us being able to find out what actually happened. We knew it was something gang related. Now, when the kids fought, the small guys, um, the teenagers, the little kids. I used to hate like when I was going in a house and something happened and the kids will run up the steps all at once, and like they'll be like knocking and banging on your door like they're getting ready to jump me, right? I hated that moment. I hated that. And it happens so often, right? It may be that, you didn't let someone see something that day and they felt pissed off and they went and got all their friends, and you had to run home and close the door, and your mother is in there like they banging on the door like we finna do this to you, we finna do that. You know, I hated those moments, like, because I was happy when I was able to leave and get out of that type of environment, leaving Chicago altogether. That was when I was able to get a sigh of relief and really learn how to be an adult. Um, but what I noticed is that the kids, they would knuckle up, they would fight, they would jump you, they would do all type of stuff. Like Chicago is notorious for, um, maritime maritime laws on cement blocks, for uh, less of a better expression. Um, so you saw that, but this is the thing, it doesn't have to come to that point. And like, this is where men have to realize that, you have a child, you have a son, a daughter. Forget what the mother is saying. Like, you need to find a way to be in that child's life. You need to find out how to teach them the right things instead of the wrong things. So like, when the women got into it, the women would take it to a point where like there would be no repairing, what just occurred. They would run up to you with, a hot iron device, or they'll run up to you with a crowbar or something like that, and they get ready to hit you with it. The women arguing with other women, this is when all the women in the projects would come out and just brawl. This is when I knew like I had to leave this environment. Like women just, telling their sons to go back out and do this to that person that pissed them off. My mother never did that to me. Like, she never said go back out and fight, or, go back out and do this. Like, it wasn't any of that. But I noticed like when I was being raised around all these people, I noticed that I didn't have that anger bone in me. I didn't have that curse, audible in me. Like, I wasn't a person that, took things to that extent, or got down in that fashion. This is how I knew I was different than everybody. Because a lot of people, the way that they take stuff, you wouldn't think that this person living in this row, this person living in this row, this person living in this row. They wouldn't think like, I do have 10 toes, I do have 10 fingers. Why do they have 10 fingers and 10 toes? They don't know that their grandparents knew each other. Even in cases where they've left the state, like even like first migration, second migration, the great migration, right? They don't think that their great grandparents knew each other. So you have all of these instances where women are getting into it, and they're arguing with one another, and they're creating, spats between, the fact that, someone gets hit or someone gets stabbed or something like that. This is never going to be repaired, And I see that a lot, like even in places like Chicago and, not so much other places. I only see it in that place. It's just like, you have good people living alongside bad people, and I don't know how the government is going to, get to the outlaying problem of that. Like, I don't know how they're going to solve it, because it was always an adventure after school. You knew something. You knew something was going to happen. And, sorry about that. You knew something was going to happen. So I need people to really understand something here. Conflict resolution comes in a variety of different ways. We have to teach our children critical thinking skills. We have to teach them about Black psychology. We have to teach them about numeration and time, and also event. We have to teach them about these things, because like Gen Z is not going to raise themselves. Gen Alpha is not going to raise themselves. And what I'm saying with Gen Z is that they have Gen Alpha already underneath them, having kids. If you're a single mother, and you're being, raised in the fashion of you're still living with your own mother, who may be a Gen Xer, or, you may be living with your grandmother who's a baby boomer. I don't think, like, just me speaking as a millennial, I don't think like it's going to come where, we're able to teach the generations how to do good or do better. It has to be an all-in-one type of method of applying an application to where we're understanding that the community is not just going to do it on its own in some mysterious way just because you said, Barack Obama, he gave a unique speech, or Joe Biden gave a unique speech, or Donald Trump gave a unique speech. It's criminal at this point that these men are still giving speeches in light of the fact that A man just sat in the Pontiac and got gunned down with his son in the passenger seat. You see what I mean? It's criminal to this point that stuff like this is still happening, where you have an officer at a higher rank not being held responsible for, you know, what his officers on their patrol are doing. You know, so it's like, I want to see the Black liberation movement kind of take the responsibility of being the podcasters, or, you know, being the directors or the producers in a particular movie or a particular series, explaining what actually needs to happen as far as us understanding what we need to do as Black men and Black women in a fashion that, you know, leadership or government is just not there to take the reins of, you know, a child graduating from college at 17 years old, or a 9-year-old being able to create a vehicle that would get a teenager from point A to point B in a mode that he has his own reliance and his own economy, under the fact that he has his own banking account. You know, so I'm really disturbed when, you know, I see that not only did millennials go through it, not only did Gen Xers go through it, but Gen Zers are going through it. Violence is something we don't know how to get rid of. It's something that it always rears its ugly head, in a point that, you know, nothing can be done about it. I don't know how to inspire a person to do right. I don't know how to inspire a person to help someone else do right. You know, it takes an extraordinary man and extraordinary woman to say, you know, I'm going to get up on this day, ignore the fact that I don't need a job, but I'm going to make the community my first employment. I'm going to go door to door and make sure, you know, Miss Ross, she has, you know, whatever she needs. I'm going to make sure I can go to Miss Jenkins' house and make sure she has whatever she needs. And again, like when I was being raised up, right? 9, 10, you know, around these years, right? I was around men who were traditionals. You know, I was around, my father wasn't around after a certain age because my mother felt like, you know, him and her couldn't get along. So what I noticed is that, you know, I still had men around me, right? And the men were just like, you know, they took care of the people who they knew. You know what I mean? They took care of the community that was at arm's reach. And like these men are still around, right? And, you know, some of them are actively speaking about, you know, the social injustices that's happening in Chicago. Some of them have joined the American Indian movement. You know, they're still around, you know, so I'm not seeing this happen, you know, with what's going on in the community in other places, you know, particularly in, you know, outstretched, you know, where I'm from, my particular area. I'm not seeing it happen, you know, even when I'm in places like Southeast Michigan, right? And I look around, you know, I don't see the sense of community. I don't see the sense of Black liberation. I don't see the sense of a domino effect. You know, I don't see a mother, you know, walking with a father down the street pushing a stroller. It's almost like the Black community has somehow, you know, left the earth. You know what I mean? Like, I don't see the Black community anymore. Unless I go to Chicago, I'm seeing people walking around and I'm seeing all type of activity, right? But I notice like in places like Southeast Michigan, even parts of Indiana, right, where there's black people. Um, they're raising the children differently than the traditionals had been being raised. Um, the kids aren't outside playing anymore. You know what I mean? Um, the kids don't have, the know-how to do anything without a tablet or a phone. A kid, he's 9, 10 years old, he has his own phone now. A kid that's 6, 5 years old, he has his own phone now in his name, right? Um, the traditionals, I think, like, they will look at us as being like very spoiled because we have so much at our hands and we're not taking advantage of it. Um, we're not taking advantage of the things that we have. You know, just the fact that you have a income, and you're able to uh, help someone else out, and you don't help them out, you're going to spend your last $500 on an outfit, some shoes, and a ticket to go to the club that night. That means like something is internally wrong with our uh, ability to solve internal conflicts. And that's all I want to talk about in this video is that we need to figure a thing out, very quickly, so that Gen Alphas and Gen Zers don't end up, as the adults were in the uh, mid and late and early 80s. We need to make sure that doesn't happen, because I sure don't want to have to walk out my house one day and see a woman uh, crawling on the ground or half woke, half asleep, and it's man sitting on the corner, blasting loud music. You know what I'm saying? And we got millennials who are sitting on the porch sweeping, getting ready to put some car oil or change the emission fluid or something, like transmission fluid or something like that. I don't know, doing something like that. This is what I'm saying. Like, we really need to figure this out, man. Like, we need social justice warriors. We need men who are very active. You know what I mean? Like, we need that. It doesn't matter whatever you do. Like, we just need men who are active. Like, we had that in the '60s with Julian Bond. You know what I mean? And even now, like, you have the Kwame Nkrumah, all these men, right? We need that. So this is what I want to see. Like, I'm really applauding to you all to say, you know what, I will take on the arraignment of making a vow to my community and saying that, if a child needs to be tutored, I'm going to tutor that child. I didn't have anyone to come over my house and say, I'm going to help you learn this math test you're trying to pass. I sat on my mother's couch when I used to live over there on St. Lawrence, on the south side of Chicago, at 13, 12 years old, reading off from the multiplication cards, trying to learn my multiplication. No one was tutoring me. You see what I'm saying? Like, this is what I'm saying. Like, when we're in this situation where we're trying to learn about, how can we, better apply strong situations, strong situational methods, the community needs to understand something. That child isn't going to raise himself or herself. Just not going to happen. So think about that. Great peace. Yakoki.